It seems it can only take 7 highly talented people to spawn an obsession, cultural phenomenon, and a franchise that would last nearly 40 years and going strong. This is Final Fantasy. Released in Japan in 1987 for the Nintendo Famicom, and then in North America in 1990 on the Nintendo Entertainment System, it would go on to be a huge commercial success in both regions, spawning a plethora of sequels and spin-offs that morphed the franchise throughout its lifespan. This NES edition had very little changed from the Famicom version, so North American audiences basically got the full experience of the original, a testament to how good the game was since it actually sold even better internationally than it did locally in Japan. The elements of the world are controlled by 4 crystals that centuries ago went dark, thus throwing everything into chaos. A prophecy was foretold that 4 warriors of light will appear and journey to vanquish the darkness that plagues the crystals. You start the game by selecting your party of 4 from a pool of 6 classes, or, as the franchise calls them, jobs. There's the fighter, who can equip the best weapons and armor to strike hard and protect the party. The black belt, who uses his bare hands to render his enemies nullified. The thief, who can help slink the party away from difficult battles. The black mage that wields powerful offensive magics. The white mage, who can use healing magics to keep your party going. And the red mage, who can use both offensive and defensive magics decently, as well as be an okay physical striker. A jack of all trades, if you will. You begin in the Kingdom of Cornelia, where you are tasked with defeating the disgraced swordsman Garland and saving the kidnapped Princess Sarah. Very early on, you succeed in this endeavor, and the king commissions a bridge to be built to the north so that you can continue your journey. Where most RPGs at the time would make rescuing a princess the end goal, Final Fantasy made it known that this was only the beginning of a grander tale that spans a massive 3 continents. While in towns, you can speak with residents who will have clues to guide you on your journey, as well as expand on some of the world's lore. There are shops that you can purchase weapons, armor, and items, as well as shops to buy black and white magics. There's also a church in most towns where you can resurrect fallen allies, and an inn to keep your party as fresh as possible. Out on the world map and in dungeons, you will randomly encounter groups of monsters in turn-based combat. You enter your commands and pick your targets, but you need to be strategic because if you have multiple party members target one enemy, and that enemy is terminated, then the following party members will still take a swing for them, thus wasting their turn. The early combat was a good lesson in equipment management. If you made a run for the outside without buying any gear, combat would prove nearly futile. If you did end up spending the free money you had to begin with on gearing up, then the first bits of combat would not be a problem. The further along you go, the harder the fights will be, but the rewards are bigger. Gaining money through combat was about as important as gaining experience points. While getting XP would level up your party's stats, having the money available made sure you still kept your group's gear up to snuff for the challenges ahead, as well as enough to hit an inn to rest up. Looking at the numbers for level progression, getting from level 1 to 2 only took 40 XP, but then going from level 2 to 3 required 4 times that amount, nearly 160 XP. This helped to combat naturally over-leveling the parties so that there was still enough challenge to the game, but it also didn't make it impossible for those who chose to grind out an extra level or 2 before progressing. The flow of combat wasn't too bad, especially when you set the text box animation rate to a higher number. It wasn't entirely necessary to read all the combat info, but sometimes it would help in planning your targeting and strategy in case something's not working. The only time combat started getting stale was after a long period of grinding in one area. Once you moved along, the tougher enemies made decision-making more involved again. Walking around felt nice and smooth, and being able to interact with everything using only one, or sometimes none, button presses allowed the game to flow nicely. Now, this may sound like a dig at that other JRPG franchise, but it's important to understand that the development team really took a look at shortcomings of years past games and made an effort to mitigate any reason to make the player put the controller down. The gameplay of Final Fantasy gets a 9 out of 10. Being a first crack at this RPG thing, Final Fantasy's environments mainly feature typical medieval fantasy elements to them. Towns, castles, ruins, forests, and the like. Now, this may sound a bit harsh, but the backgrounds really were visually generic. However, how they used those elements are where they shined. Within the first hour of the game, you've already seen 5 different environments with 6 different battle scene backgrounds. The layouts work well too overall, and especially the twist of the bridge to cross the river was not given away too early. Now for the great part. Final Fantasy is a franchise that's known to always push the boundaries of visuals, and it started from game 1. When you look at the main character sprites, they are loaded with charm and character, especially the Black Mage, who's gone on to be a franchise staple. That's not to overshadow the White and Red Mages either. And while the Thief, Fighter, and Black Belt sprites didn't last when the SNES era came, they were still alive and well through the NES games. Even the non-combat sprites looked fun and detailed. And let's talk about the NPCs. There were plenty of designs to go around that reuses seemed far and few in between, even though they were still obvious when you were really paying attention. And let's talk about the battle scene. There was a space at the top reserved for the environment, treating it like a background for combat, but not layering under the action. And for the first time in any video game RPG, you were able to see your party on the screen along with the enemies. Prior to this game, combat scenes were usually first-person based and you only saw special effects interact with the enemies. In Final Fantasy, you see the full sprites of your party actually move forward and swing their weapons or cast their magic. They didn't truly interact with the enemy sprites, but this was a major step forward to how turn-based combat was to be presented in the future. And the monster designs also had some character to them, although for the most part, they were heavily influenced by already existing creatures in Dungeons & Dragons. That's not to throw shade on the renowned artist Yoshitaka Amano though. His designs were so good that the graphics artists literally copied Amano's drawings into the sprites line for line. The graphics of Final Fantasy get a 10 out of 10. And now we get to the other thing that the Final Fantasy franchise excels at, the music. Composed by the legendary Nobuo Uematsu, every tune in this game sets the tone perfectly. Having composed the tracks on real instruments meant he had to scale back the songs to be able to work with the Famicom's sound chip. But he managed it splendidly, still hitting every important note and chord. Starting the game out in the open world, you're treated to the uplifting song of a grand adventure in dire times that you'll hear very often as you traverse the globe. Entering the castle of Cornelia, we hear a regal tune that would end up being used anytime you'll be speaking with anybody of importance in the regions. The town theme is soothing and relaxing, as if to say that this is a safe haven where you can replenish yourself. Then we get to the battle theme. The instruments will start to make you think it's just basic generic fighting music, until you get deeper into the tune where it shifts and augments the sense of bravely fighting for survival. That beginning of the tune, by the way, would go on to be a defining feature in at least 7 future Final Fantasy battle themes. Now, the sound effects don't really hit the same heights as the music. They work fine, but are generic. Nothing really iconic about them. I will say though, you really kind of feel the hit when you hear the enemy's attack connect with your party member. The music and sound get a 9 out of 10. I had an uncle that owned this game, and I would end up playing it pretty often when visiting. I was really young, so I don't think I even made it past the first 40 minutes mark. Thank God my uncle already finished with it though, because I didn't even think back then about the fact that there was only one save slot in this game. Sorry, Unc. Surely this is the case with many people, but Final Fantasy on the NES was my very first exposure to RPGs. Mind you, I didn't really know what was going on at the time, but the distinction still stands. Considering I would go on to love RPGs as a genre in my gaming life, I'd say this is as important to me as it was to the jrpg genre as a whole. The nostalgia hit gets a 9 out of 10. What this game did for the genre, the franchise, and the fortunes of the developer, Squaresoft, was nothing short of miraculous. As the years would go on and more people joined the company, the franchise would grow to become the juggernaut that it is today. Back in 2021 to 2022, I started a Final Fantasy marathon where I would stream every mainline title in anticipation for its 16th release. Even though I already knew everything that the franchise would become, it was fun to observe where it all started, how classic concepts were first implemented, and the evolution that they would take throughout the years. And if you're interested in seeing that journey, I have my full playthrough of Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster up on YouTube right now. Just hit the link in the description and it'll take you to the whole playlist. Final Fantasy is so important to gaming history and was such a solid game that there have been 19 re-releases, remakes, and remasters ever since it was first released. It's true that the other editions will give you better quality of life upgrades to respect your time more, but if you really want to get that classic feeling, I would recommend firing up the old NES and Famicom versions, just to truly know where it all came from.